The Dragons' Dare at Doklam is our top focus story on the broadcast, but we will discuss about how China has been upping the ante. 3 months and 10 instances of China trying to undermine India-China relations. Protests about His Holiness, the Dalai Lama's visit, China putting a spoke in India's bid to enter the nuclear suppliers group, move to have have Maulana Masood Azhar blocked at the United Nations Security Council, China blocking that move, then blocking the access of Kailash Mansarovar pilgrims from the Nathula route. So a series of provocations from China. Add to this shrill statements coming from Chinese army, from the Chinese government spokespersons. China also slamming the US ban on Syed Salahuddin, PLA jostling with Indian troops at the border, destroying Indian bunkers, demanding the withdrawal of Indian troops to restore normalcy. What's China up to? I now want to shift focus to a pressing issue closer home, and this is at India's northeastern borders, the Dragon Dare. One shrill statement after the other coming from China, despite a very measured response from Bhutan, an extremely measured response from India. Belligerent statements continue to come day after day from China. The question is, why? What's the bigger game plan? Let's find out.
To travel our
area.
Yeah.
This is not your.
This is not your area.
No.
This is not our area.
This is our area. And you are doing recce.
After verbal duels, physical jostling, and baseless territorial claims, now it's open warmongering by the Chinese. An editorial in China's state-run Global Times has called for teaching India a bitter lesson and warned Delhi that a military conflict with China would inflict greater losses than that in 1962. It also says that China's people are infuriated by India's provocation and that they look down upon India's military might, and that China's People's Liberation Army is powerful enough to expel Indian troops.
मैं समझता हूँ ये डिप्लोमेटिक लेवल पे ये इशू हल हो सकता है। हम यही चाहते हैं जहाँ पे पहले चाइनीज़ थे वही स्थिति बनी रहे। चाइना जो भूटान की टेरिटरी में आगे बढ़ रहे हैं, तो हम यही चाहते हैं कि आप आगे मत बढ़ो। ये हमारे सिक्योरिटी कंसर्न्स है और ये हमारा स्टैंड है।
Chinese ambassador to India, Luo Zhaohui, is also accusing India of using Bhutan to further its interest.
उन्होंने कहा कि भूटान के मामले में इंटरफेयर ना करे भारत, और ये चाइना और भूटान का मामला है।
भूटान खुद बोलता है ना, भूटान के किंग ने कल स्टेटमेंट दिया है कि चाइना हमारे टेरिटरी में आ रही है। तो भूटान क्या कहती है ये तो आप समझो।
The Tri-Junction, the point where the borders of India, China and Bhutan meet, is a strategic concern for India. China, by encroaching territory, can get closer to what is widely known as the Chicken's Neck, a narrow corridor that links the northeast to the rest of India. Experts say China is upset with India for 4 reasons: our proximity with the US, the continued opposition to the China-Pakistan economic corridor, the friendly and diplomatic relations between India and Bhutan, and the ever-growing Indian economy.
China on Wednesday reiterated its stand that an immediate withdrawal of Indian troops to the Indian side of the boundary was a precondition to resolving the standoff and also a precondition from preventing the situation from worsening. China's strong words once again also reminding India that in its view, India had trespassed the delimited boundary in Sikkim. China in fact even invoking the Panchsheel of the 1950s, saying that India, which proposed Panchsheel, was now violating it. Reporting for India Today in Beijing, this is Anand Krishna.
Pramit Pal Chaudhary is one of the best voices on foreign affairs. He joins us on the broadcast. Major General G.D. Bakshi will give us a strategic affairs analysis on the situation on ground. But I quickly want to cut across to India Today's Anand Krishnan, who joins us live from Beijing. Anand, the statements that are coming from the Chinese media, belligerent statements that came from the Chinese military, carrying out a 35-ton tank exercise in Tibet, Chinese media saying India should be taught a lesson, suffer even greater losses than 1962. What's cooking?
Well, Gaurav, it's day 21 and it seems to be pretty relentless. Chinese media, hawkish papers like Global Times, I wouldn't take them too seriously, but what's worrying is the Chinese government as well this time has been getting into the act. Today, again, the Chinese Foreign Ministry pretty much saying that India triggered this entire standoff, and the precondition for any kind of dialogue would be India completely withdrawing first. So China really keeping up the public pressure, and as you mentioned as well, the question is, I mean, does this narrow the space for wiggle room for all three to sort of have an amicable de-escalation?
Absolutely. Pramitpal Chaudhary, why is China painting itself in a corner with these very shrill, very belligerent statements? Is China very upset that India took a stance, something perhaps that China did not expect India to do?
Well, if you look at the Chinese official statements, they have focused, I think, on, I would argue, on two areas. One is the argument that the border in that area, rather than being delimited on the basis of a 2010 bilateral understanding, should instead be based on an Anglo-Chinese treaty in the 19th century. Obviously, by changing that, if you look at what the earlier treaty says, that would give China an advantage territorially. India obviously says no. The 2010 understanding, which China agreed to, is obviously the agreement that should still stand. And I think that is the core of the issue. To some degree, it's a very hard negotiating posture by China to basically shift the goalposts on the border negotiations with India. The second cluster of official statements has been focused on Bhutan. And they've had a long record in China of pressing the Bhutanese with the overall goal of forcing Bhutan to have full diplomatic ties with China, which at present does not exist. Bhutan does not have full diplomatic ties with China.
Yes.
And they've always been pushing very hard at some point or another for Bhutan to come and do this. So those are the two official positions that the Chinese government has kept repeatedly coming out. Now, through the media and through other indirect methods, the Chinese have also signaled their irritation on our refusal to endorse the One Belt, One Road, or what they now call the Belt Road Initiative, and of course the Indo-US strategic relationship, which some people in China believe is aimed at them. But keep in mind, China so far has not, you mentioned that you now have, I think, 6,000 soldiers amassed on the Doklam plateau between the two sides. But there have been no weapons drawn, no bullets have been fired. The two sides, and the Chinese included, have been very careful to abide by the 4 border management agreements. So China has exceeded the rhetoric, it's put a lot of pressure, but it's not broken the understanding. So my sense is that it's a psychological game on their part to keep us off balance and to position themselves in a stronger negotiating position on the border.
And clearly this time, India, it appears, refuses to buckle under Chinese pressure or given to psyops. General Bakshi, when you look at the situation on ground, now, what is China's game plan? Do they actually want to build that road, as that map that we've put out on India today shows that their aim is to, at some point of time, actually slice off India's Siliguri corridor, the Chicken's Neck area, and then cut off the entire northeast? Is that the game plan?
You know, Gaurav, the simple fact is that China must understand that the Siliguri corridor is a core concern of the Indian Republic. Just like China has core issues which are non-negotiable, so has India certain core strategic imperatives which it cannot see violated at will by the other countries. It will not retreat on these issues. There is no question. The Doklam plateau is just 50 kilometers as the crow flies from the narrowest portion of the Siliguri corridor called the Chicken's Neck, which is just 17 kilometers wide. All of India's east-west communications pass through this narrow neck. And if you cut this neck off, the whole of the northeast is cut off from the rest of India. The entire troops deployed in Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram are cut off. Which country will accept this kind of a risk? China is trying to build a class 40 road through the Doklam plateau, and a class 40 road means China will be able to get its medium and heavy artillery to bring the Siliguri corridor under the range of its guns.
And that's why India needs to be careful. But Pramit, if I can come back to Pramit Pal Chaudhary once again. So there is a lot of saber rattling that's happening from China's side. India's response has been very measured. Bhutan's response has been extremely measured. Why is China hesitating to let the mechanism, the boundary mechanism kick in? If there's a dispute, the boundary mechanism, border management takes over. Why is China insisting that India should first withdraw? Only then can there be talks.
Well, that would be a standard hard negotiating posture. But you're right, what is surprising this time has been the size of the Chinese troop presence and the length of this standoff. This is unusually long, I think we're now in our third week is just concluded, and it looks like it's just going to go on and on. And the sense, we can only guess at this point because the Chinese system is so opaque. Among the arguments is that one, China wants to test the relationship between India and Bhutan. For Bhutan, this is a test because Bhutan is incapable of defending itself. I mean, this is a country that is so pacific that it does not allow animals to be slaughtered on its soil, right? Let alone in a position to defend itself against China. So this is so for Bhutan, if India is not prepared to stand up on their behalf, then for Bhutan the relationship with India really becomes pointless.
Oh, absolutely.
Second, and we're guessing here, the Chinese Xi Jinping is going to be in November going into his party congress and seeking a second term. There seems to be increasingly, not just with India but with other countries, South China Sea, to some degree with Japan, and now increasingly I think with the United States over North Korea, China is taking a more and more nationalistic hardline position on many foreign policy issues.
Right.
And this may be Xi Jinping's way of ensuring that he goes into the party congress in November and secures his second term with an overwhelming majority. Okay.
Now, Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi meet in Hamburg on the sidelines of G20. Can India expect anything? Does China look forward to something in these talks, Anant, or not at all? Because even last time, while Depsang, was sorted out with communication between Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Chumar, we've seen China hasn't really helped India on the nuclear suppliers group, despite the heads of government and state meeting.
Gaurav, we're still kept waiting in terms of whether or not there's a bilateral meeting. I think that'll be an interesting sign if it does take place, because frankly it wasn't expected, because they met last month at the SEO. So if they do meet, in addition to the BRICS informal leaders meeting, which will give them a chance to talk face to face, it'll be an interesting sign that both want to de-escalate. But as of now, we're still waiting for confirmation on whether or not they will meet. So it'll be an interesting sign in of itself. But as you said in the Chumar incident as well, even though Xi Jinping was in India, the standoff didn't end. It took almost a week after his return to Beijing for things to sort of de-escalate, which also shows that Xi Jinping, as powerful as he is, he's not going to go against the PLA. And as Pramit said in a party congress here as well, no Central Military Commission chief is going to tell his men to stand down. So we'll have to wait and see how that dynamic plays out, and if they meet as well, it'll be interesting to see what sort of impact that will have on the standoff.
So, General, can this escalate? So far, though troops are amassed in numbers on either side, but as Pramit Pal Chaudhary was also pointing out, they are unarmed. There hasn't been an escalation. There's rhetoric from the diplomatic side or the media side, but on ground, there is no contact. So can this flare up, or will they just stay in that position till the time diplomats can sort out the matter, General?
You know, firstly, I think China must remember that India is not the Philippines. Number two, as our defense minister rightly pointed out, that between 1962 and 2017, a lot of water has flown down the Brahmaputra. I would also not reckon that the Chinese army is very keen for a confrontation, armed confrontation, because would they like to open two fronts concurrently? They have problems in the South China Sea. Would they concurrently like to open up another front? That is their choice. That is their choice. And at the end of this, they are rational actors and they make their position rationally. There is a lot of psychological pressure that they are putting. And the very nature of the psychological pressure tells us that I'm sure they are not looking for a fight.
Clearly, and Pramit Pal Chaudhary, do you see this escalate? Do you see this escalate into a short, sharp conflict, perhaps, or will it gradually, the diplomats will take over and bring tempers down?
I don't expect it to. I would be very surprised if it escalates to any sort of military confrontation in which actual firepower is exchanged. For one reason, it is a very bad place for China to trigger a fight.
Yes.
General Bakshi probably know better than I would, but from all the military men I have spoken with, the Chumbi Valley is an area where India is, it's one of the few areas on the border where India dominates the high points. The Chinese would effectively be caught in a trap. It is an area where it is the worst possible place for China to pick a fight with India. And it is one reason India is not going to back down, because if India backs down at Chumbi Valley, it is effectively it'll back down everywhere. So this is a strange place to actually trigger a military confrontation. So it still raises the question of what is China's end game here, and it may possibly, and we can't rule this out, the Chinese are not infallible, that they have miscalculated by deciding to pick a fight in Chumbi Valley, not realizing, perhaps in Beijing, that militarily this is actually a place where India dominates.
Point. Let's track the story very closely. To all my guests, many thanks for joining me. The bully is China, clearly trying to bully India. India so far staring the bully down, and it's not just Bhutan but rest of Asia looking at what India's response will be in this situation. India is militarily and diplomatically on a very strong wicket here. We'll continue to track the story very closely. That is all I have time for in this India First special. Many thanks for watching.